Hi, everybody. I want to say good evening and welcome to the Hudson Library and Historical Society's virtual author series. Tonight, we are so excited to be streaming a live event with bestselling author Mary Roach, who will speak in conversation with author and journalist Maria Konnikova. We have many wonderful authors coming up, so I highly recommend you check out our website to get all the latest ones that are coming. We have so many coming up in the next few weeks, so you should definitely check it out. There's something for everyone. If you're interested in purchasing a book tonight, we are proud to partner with our local independent bookstore, The Learned Owl, and there are some limited signed book plates available. So check out there. The link will be posted in the chat multiple times throughout the program. Speaking of that, anytime if you have a question for either of our two speakers this evening, please feel free to leave all your questions in the Q&A section, or if you're watching us on YouTube, you can leave them in the comments and we will answer them. We'll try to get through as many questions as we can tonight. So now that's all taken care of, on to tonight's speakers. Maria Konnikova is a New York Times bestselling author, journalist, and professional poker player. She is the recent author of The Biggest Bluff, a New York Times bestseller and editor's choice. Her previous books include the bestsellers The Confidence Game, which won the 2016 Robert P. Ballas Prize in Critical Thinking, and Mastermind, How to Think Like Sherlock Holmes, an Anthony and Agatha award-winning finalist. Maria is a regular contributor to The New Yorker, and her writing has won numerous awards, including the 2019 Excellence in Science Journalism Award from the Society of Personality and Social Psychology. Mary Roach is the author of 6 New York Times bestsellers, including Stiff, The Curious Life of Human Cadavers, Gulp, Adventures in the Alimentary Canal, and Packing for Mars, The Curious Science of Life in the Void. Her new book, Fuzz, When Nature Breaks the Law, debuted last week. I have my copy here. She has written for the National Geographic, Wired, the New York Times Magazine, among many others. Her TED Talk made the top 20 most watched list for TED Talks. She's also a guest editor for the Best American Science and Nature Writing, and was a finalist for the Royal Society's Winton Prize and the winner of the American Engineering Society's Journalism Award. Thank you, Mary and Maria, for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And I am so incredibly excited to get to interview Mary today, because Mary, let me just go on for about 10 minutes, right? And then we can have a conversation. Yeah. No, but Mary has been an inspiration to me for my entire career, because when I just started out, I was a baby writer breaking into science writing. She was one of the voices that I looked at and said, holy shit, you can make this funny, and you can make people want to read it, and you can make it come alive. And, I never thought I'd want to read about shit, but you know what? I do when Mary writes about it. And so it's just such a joy to have met her later on in my career and to be able to be with her today. And her latest book, Fuzz, is just, I'm going to say joy again, because, I am a writer, so I have lots of big words. It is a joy. It is such a great book. And I really recommend that you all buy a copy right now. If you already have a copy, please buy another one, because it makes for great gifts for people. You're going to learn all sorts of stuff, including things I took notes on, because I spent some time in Vermont. And so I have some now survival strategies, which we can talk about later. But when I came to those sections, I was like, oh my God, all right, taking out my pen. So thank you so much, Mary. I'm really happy to be here. And everyone else, you'll see the Q&A down at the bottom of your Zoom. Please submit questions at any point in time, and we'll get a chance to get back to all of them at the end. So thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Maria.
Let's talk about Fuzz.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited that you're here and they're doing this, because I admire you so much. And The Biggest Bluff was just the fact that you went from not knowing how many cards were in a deck to the World Series of poker is just unbelievable. So smart. And it's so, and just such a fun ride that book was, just so entertaining. And of course, very educational and helpful in terms of running my own life and taking risks and being smart about those things. So,
you definitely did not need much in terms of encouraging risk taking, as I learned when reading Fuzz, because it highlights some experiences that you've had with all sorts of animals that I would personally never want to meet. And so I think that there's a lot of risk taking already in your DNA. But let's start kind of at the beginning. So when we start the book, we're already immersed in it, and you're already kind of immersed in all of this research about, how do we figure out how people were killed by wild animals, as one does. So can you take us through kind of the Genesis journey? I know you're probably asked this every single time, but I'm always fascinated, with great minds, where did the ideas come from? What made you go to the animal kingdom and plant kingdom?
Yeah. Well, I've often written about the human body, some elements of it, or the human body in strange conditions like war or space. I had this sense that I'd sort of there's only so many parts and only so many things you can do with a human body, and I felt like I kind of a little bit run that course. So that put me into this kind of period of random grasping and groping. And I thought I had a couple of kind of false starts that kind of congealed and morphed into this book. I wish I had a tidy origin story, like I was raised by wolves or something. I don't have that kind of personal experience to bring to it. But I got interested. I spent some time up in the National Wildlife Forensics Laboratory up in Ashland, Oregon, which I went on just a kind of a blind sense that maybe there's a book here, because I was fascinated by this woman, Bonnie Yates, who had put together a hare library. It's actually a library of different, mostly endangered species, because when contraband is confiscated that may have, maybe endangered species pelts or parts that are used medicinally, she has to be able to identify it and go into a courtroom and say, yes, this is in fact, I can prove to you this is an endangered tiger or whatever it is. So I just like the idea of somebody putting together a hare library and also writing a paper. She wrote a paper on how to distinguish real versus counterfeit tiger penis, which we could get into if you want to, but we don't have to. I'm actually very good at that now. I can tell you easily if it's real or fake.
In the book, you're withholding important information.
It's not in the book. No, it's not in the book because this was all like crimes against wildlife, and that's where I was going originally. And then I went up to the lab, and the director of the lab kind of listened to me prattle on about I'd like to tag along on investigations. I'd like to spend some time and that there's probably some sweatshop where somebody's making these turning horse penis into tiger penis and carving the barbs, and I had this sense of adventure that I was about to set out on. And he said, legally, no, any open case, you cannot take part. You cannot shadow the investigator. You cannot be involved legally. Forget it. Go home. So I did. And I eventually kind of turned it around. And instead of looking at crimes against wildlife, I thought, well, what about when wildlife are the perpetrators?
Right.
And I realized that there's actually a whole science dedicated to that called human wildlife conflict, which doesn't, it's a very kind of techie term. So, that's nowhere in the subtitle, but that is at the core of this book, humans and wildlife in conflict. Yeah. And what can science kind of bring to bear on these problems, and how do we prevent them? How do we solve them? And that was kind of how I got there, with a side detour to agricultural crime, which I thought I read about. There's actually a category of felony called grand theft avocado, which is right before the Super Bowl. Avocados become very valuable, and people will go in and steal truckloads of avocados. And then if they get busted and tried, the crime is grand theft avocado, which isn't enough to pin half a book on. So I dropped the ag crime. And then I realized, it makes a certain amount of sense to just go crime by crime. So we start with the felonies, manslaughter, home invasion, breaking and entering, and then we have the misdemeanors, jaywalking, littering, trespassing, the kind of more annoying things that animals do. So that's a very long-winded answer for you, but that was kind of the path. And for me, it's often that way, or I you just start with a little shred, like, or a nugget, like the hair library. I was like, what book could I build around that? I'm kind of like there used to be this ad by Kohler, the fancy plumbing fixture.
Sure.
This ad where this man walks into an architect's office and he puts this pretentious faucet on the desk and he goes to the architect, build a house around this. So I kind of come at books that way, starting with some really appealing nugget and thinking, what would be the book that I build around that? Just kind of a back-assward way to come up with a book topic, but that's kind of what I do.
I love it. And the book really is about kind of this uneasy coexistence between nature and human. And I'm wondering, because you seem to go back and forth depending on where we are. And I went back and forth, and I'm not sure where I come out. So what is your stance on kind of who's to blame here and who needs to do the changing, right? Is it horrible animals? Is it horrible humans? Is it kind of, it depends. What is our ideal state of coexistence?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, the thing to keep in mind, of course, is that animals are not following of course, our laws are written for humans, and they're just animals. Animals follow instincts, so you can't really blame them. They're the animals often looking for food. And, in the case of bears, it's usually food is involved in any altercation between a person and a bear. The bear wants the food, the person or the person's dog gets involved, and then things get ugly. So, and that's true with birds, with rodents. We have something that they want, and they're like, I don't know, there it is. Why shouldn't I go take it? So I think you can't, it's very, you can't blame the ant. You can definitely be annoyed by the animals. You can be afraid, but you can't blame them. And you can blame people. Sometimes I think we create a lot of our own problems, especially in terms of efforts sometimes to deal with invasive species by thinking, oh, well, what is the predator of this animal? Let's just import a shit ton of those animals and now kill those animals.
I had no idea, by the way, the New Zealand kind of clusterfuck that you described. I know that we have problems with invasive species. I had no idea it was that bad. For people who haven't read the book, you can elaborate a little bit.
The situation in New Zealand is when people first came from Europe to New Zealand, they formed these things called acclimatization societies, and part of what they did was import some of the animals that they held dear, that they loved, that they missed seeing, or that they wanted to hunt. So they brought in various ungulates to hunt, and they brought in rabbits. And the rabbits did what rabbits do, which is multiply really, really, really fast. And there were rabbits everywhere, and there were no natural predators for these rabbits. So the population was, they would strip the fields of vegetation. They were quite a problem for agriculture. And so the solution that they came up with, I mean, they definitely also hired people to try to shoot them, but they thought, okay, what if we brought in some predator that we know from Europe that can just go around and kill them all? And so they shipped in a bunch of stoats and some a variety of animals, but stoats is the main one that really took off. And so they brought the stoats in, and the stoats kind of looked around and went, yeah, okay, rabbits, kind of a little bit big. I mean, I could take it on, but these eggs lying on the ground, these strangely flightless birds, that seems like an easier, tastier option. So the stoats went after, because New Zealand, because there'd been no natural predators, the birds had evolved to be flightless. They didn't need to fly away. Nobody was coming at them to kill them. So suddenly you've brought in someone to do that. And then fast forward a little bit, and the possums were brought in to establish a fur trade. So the possums caused some problems. And then rats, of course, when ships would come into port, rats would get off the ship and would kind of infiltrate the environment. And here again, they love, a rat loves an egg and chicks and little birds that are on the ground for the taking. So New Zealand created, in an effort to resolve one problem created a much bigger problem, because there's the number of extinctions. I don't have the number in my head. It's probably in the book, but kind of a terrifying number of extinctions and near extinctions in threatened and endangered species because of these three predators. And also, and this is really sticky, feral cats and house cats that people let out. So they're coping with that. And I talk about how they're coping with it. And it's kind of a fraught situation.
Yes, I mean, there's a very interesting point in that that animals don't know what our intentions are either, right? They don't know that they were brought here to hunt this particular thing. They just do what they're going to do. But what you said before that, they don't follow our rules. I just have to, I mean, there are lots of hilarious moments in this book, as there are in all of your books. There was just this one thing that I just burst out loud laughing, and I'm going to read it right now. And it's about a North Dakota woman named Donna, who had been in 3 car crashes involving deer. And so she called into a radio station and she said, why are we encouraging deer to cross the road in such high traffic areas? And it's because the deer encounters were always at the deer crossing sign. And one of the hosts said, you seem to think that deer crossing signs are telling deer where to cross. And that's exactly what she thought. And I wanted to read that because it just shows the disconnect. It's hilarious, but it shows this this profound truth about the disconnect between the human and the animal.
Yeah. And in so many cases, I mean, these things are well-intentioned, like the effort to bring, to control rats in the sugarcane fields in Hawaii. People brought mongoose. So is the plural mongoose? I
have no idea.
Mongooses. They brought those guys over, and they forgot or overlooked the fact that one species is nocturnal and the other is diurnal. So the two shall never meet. Mm-hmm. So the mongooses or mongoose went after other prey, other animals, and the rats never even saw them. I hear tell that there's rats running around at night, but I've never seen them. So you could imagine the person who came up with that idea, fast forward and just years later thinking, oh my God, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah. So we're talking right now, we've been talking about the smaller animals, but in the book, you talk about such a variety of creatures. We meet elephants and leopards and monkeys, who I hope to never meet, and lots of other, we meet all of them. And what I actually found myself thinking as I was reading this, that the book also very sneakily is a book about animal intelligence and about how damn smart many of these species are. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, because some of these stories that you tell, some of the facts I learned, it was just wow.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing how ingenious some of the animals are, and the ones that irritate humans the most seem to be the most intelligent. The ones that have figured out how to get something from us, and when we try to stop them, they figure out a way around it. Like there was the macaques in India are just unbelievable. The researcher, the head of research at the Wildlife Institute of India, was telling me about when he went to do a talk in Himachal Pradesh. I'm probably blowing the pronunciation, but they said to me, if you go to that temple, it's a Hanuman monkey temple. So people, by making sort of offerings to the animals, encourage them. So they've gone from being bold to being very aggressive. And he said this one animal came up and he stood up at his desk and he turned his pockets inside out. He said, they will properly search you. And if you try to push them away, they'll slap you. And this other woman told me that there's an attorney who represented a housing development that was trying to sue the city and get them to do something about the macaques, which caused get up to a lot of mischief. She said there was a monkey that would come into there was a medical institute in India, and it would run into a patient's room, pull the IV out of the person's arm and suck the glucose, because there's like soda pop, it's very, very sweet, and they love sweet things. She said that they're she goes to the same health club as Prime Minister Modi. She said that the macaques are going in the swimming pool. She said, we have them in chambers when we're in court. They are in Parliament. And that last one, of course, is very fun for headline writers. Monkeys in Parliament. but they are, and same with bears. I love this fact that in Aspen, in Pitkin County, where Aspen is, there's so many bears, and so in the human environs, they've had to rewrite the building code because to make it illegal to use French doors, the kind that you pull the handle down and push. Because if you're a bear, you need to pull it down and push in, and it's very easy. Even like a hollow doorknob, that you can't use that either, because the bear has figured out it can crush the metal with its teeth, just turn its head and open the door. Just amazing ingenuity. Well, anybody who's tried to keep squirrels out of a bird feeder knows that they will figure it out. Someone just told me, because I go backpacking in the Sierras, and we always bring the bag for the food to tie a rock to one end, throw it over a branch, hoist it up. And I was talking about that in this on an NPR interview, and this woman from the Sequoia National Park, I think, called and said, no more bags. They figured it out. The bears have figured, I don't know how they figured out how to do it, if they get a stick or something and push it down, but you now need to get a metal bear-proof canister, which is quite heavy for backpacking, because the bears they figure it out. They figure it all out.
Yeah. And when we're talking about bears, it's this fascinating thing where they keep figuring it out, but then we also keep making it easier in a sense by having so much waste and having all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had no idea. So I learned from your book that their hibernation period has gotten shorter because food is plentiful. I had it makes a lot of sense, but I didn't know that was.
Yeah. And the other thing going on with that, with hibernation, the length of hibernation is shortened with global warming. So there was a paper out of Colorado that actually, I think they radio collared 61 black bears, and they compared the duration of hibernation with temperature. And for every 2 degrees Fahrenheit warmer, hibernation is shorter by a week. So projecting out to 2050, it could be as much as 40 days shorter, which is 40 more days that bears are out on the land coming into conflict with people. So yet one more thing that climate change is going to have an effect on that you didn't necessarily think about.
Yeah, for sure. And so we have a lot of these interactions that are nuisances, right? But there are also ones that can go far beyond that and can actually be dangerous. So, there's also the sense of danger from a lot of the animals. One of the things I learned, please correct me if I'm wrong, because this is very important, is that we don't care about black bear, brown bear distinctions, but you care about whether it's a bluff attack or a real attack.
Yes.
And one of the things that I picked up on is that if it's a bluff, the ears are going to be up, right? And if it's a real attack, they're going to be down.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes. That's right. That's right. Because I had always heard, very good. Go to the head of the class. I had heard when I was growing up that kind of jingle, if it's brown, lie down, like play dead. If it's black, fight back. And I mentioned that to someone at this conference that I was at, who's up in Canada, basically a wildlife management person who's out on the land dealing with bears all the time. And he said, okay, a lot of brown bears are black in color, and a lot of black bears appear brown. Just if you're going to look at the physiological differences between these animals, the claws, like the length of the claws is the telltale sign. And I'm like, if you're close enough to be measuring the claws, that is not going to be helpful. That is not going to be useful for you. And he said that, the key thing is this a real predation scenario, which is very, very rare with bears, or is it just a bluff charge? And that should determine your behavior. Because often a black bear, if you surprise a black bear, if it's got a cache of food it's protecting or cubs, and it feels threatened, it just wants you to back off. So it's going to be very big and scary and kind of charge at you with its ears up. And it's your job is to just calmly move back. Like, okay, got it, moving back, moving off. But if it is an actual attack, if this animal is not stopping, it's not a bluff, and it's really going to make contact with you, then just fight back and go for the face.
Great advice. Me versus the bear.
I know. Yeah, exactly. But people have people have successfully fought off bears and cougars. I always try to emphasize how very, very rare it is that people are in this situation. There's between 0 and 3 bear fatalities, human fatalities in bear attacks every year in this country. So between 0 and 3, and you compare that dogs, it's around 15 fatalities, mm-hmm. Snakes, around 15 fatalities a year. Viruses and bacteria, those are the ones you really should be scared of.
But I have to say, I did not know that I was supposed to be scared, but now I am terrified of leopards I'm very glad that we don't have them here.
The leopard situation that's so interesting. It is, and it's only in this one region. There are leopards in many regions of India, but in the Middle Himalaya, only there are they actually preying, like stalking and preying on humans. If you are I was down in the region where they grow a lot of tea, not Assam, the state next to it. But anyway, sometimes workers will surprise a leopard kind of snoozing under a tea plant, and there's kind of a scuffle and the cat runs off. So it's not typical of these animals that they would go after humans, but in this region in the Middle Himalaya, they do. And I was trying to get at, like, what is it that's changed? Why are people now on the menu? Why are these animals doing that? So that was really, really interesting and a little bit scary, because I did go out for a walk at one point at the wrong time of day and kind of didn't time things right and was walking home along this road, at sundown. And that's kind of when these attacks happen. And we had this very same road. We had driven in on this road. And I remember the researcher, because he's come back to this area many, many times. He goes every year. And he would point out, that bus shelter there, mm-hmm. An old man was taken 3 years ago. May of last year, an audacious attack during the day. A young girl was taken. Over here, an old woman. So he kind of narrated, it was like the death tour of the Middle Himalaya, the leopard death tour. So walking back, I was thinking, Mary, you're such an idiot. You're such an idiot. What are you doing?
I was going to say, not to give it all away, but it made me think, because one of the explanations that you talk about is pandemics and what pandemics can do, which made me think about, our current situation with people posting, last year, all these funny videos of like a cougar on a car in a downtown street in Canada, I think it was in Vancouver, and all of these things being like, nature's taking over. Yeah. And this made me actually look at it in a new light and think, actually, this isn't that funny.
No, it's not. The theory that, the theory that of Jim Corbett, who was a hunter who was brought in to track and kill this, what they call it, the man-eating leopard of Rudraprayag, which according to him, which I think it's vastly overstated, but I don't know, it was like 100.
That's a Rudyard Kipling story, right?
Yeah, it does sound like that. Yeah. Yeah. So, the local authorities have described it as like 125 kills to this one animal. Probably it was a variety of animals, but his theory, and it was interesting, was that the pandemic of 1918, the flu pandemic, so many people were dying so quickly that the people in this area, they didn't do the more typical funerary rite, which would be to take the body down to the Ganges for cremation, because the Ganges is just sort of down the mountainside. So instead, they did this kind of expedient version of that. They put a coal in the mouth and kind of roll the person down towards the river, because there just wasn't time to give the whole proper treatment to people who had died then. And a leopard will scavenge carrion, so they, carcasses, dead people. And his belief was that the leopards had developed a taste for humans during that period of time. There's other factors that, as it turns out, are contributing, which we don't have to go into now, but that was a really interesting. And I don't, you'd have to ask the leopards,
Sure.
Who knows? Is that why you guys do this?
According to my great grandfather.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So, and that was really, interesting. I mean, here in California, we are seeing so many bears in particular coming out into, when towns are evacuated, the bears are, coming in. There's no one around. I mean, bears are, they're still wary, most of them, of people, but now the people are gone. So they're like, let me see what's there to eat in there. Partly because it's opportunity. It's a crime of opportunity, but also it's a crime of desperation because they have been displaced from the area where they are used to being, and they know where the food sources are. The food and their food. Bears eat a lot of berries and acorns and grasses. They're and when those things burn up, they're going to turn to an alternate source. So they're not equipped for pouncing and killing and eating the way say a cougar is. They're omnivores. They have molars for crushing things. So it's it's not like we're going to see sort of killer bears stalking humans, I don't think, but it definitely it's changing the dynamic.
For sure. And once again, when you mention California, I think this is another theme that there are these climate change things that are changing the balance and changing how violent or how shy different species are, just because they can't find food or all of these things are being disrupted.
Yeah. And the drought too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Seeing more animals coming into suburban areas earlier in the season. Usually you see that more toward August and September, and the people at California Fish and Wildlife have been getting calls like as early as May because we are in a drought.
Yeah, unfortunately. So I was, I am now very scared of leopards, but it's not like I wasn't scared of leopards before. Now, elephants, that was a new one. I didn't know that I was supposed to be scared of elephants. I always thought that elephants were these wonderful, and I still think they're wonderful and majestic. But let's talk just a little bit about your experience and what you learned with elephants, because one of the things that this book has done is change my view of a lot of animals and kind of subvert these popular culture.
Yeah, tropes. Well, I was raised on Babar, the elephant in the green suit with the spats. I mean, you can't be very vicious if you're wearing spats, I don't think. I don't know. Do you have a monocle too, or is that Mr. Peanut? I don't know. Anyway, but Babar, Dumbo, National Geographic, which did not, to my recollection, highlight elephant-human conflict. So I went to India. I spending time with this researcher who helps communities deal more safely with elephants, looking for sort of preventive measures. And I, even though I knew the statistics, which are quite alarming, like 500 people a year in India killed by elephants, I knew I had that fact in my head, but it didn't really sink in. And I got there, and the first night we stayed in this little lodge that the government rents out to researchers, and it was just down the road from a place that there's a big sign that says danger elephant crossing. So what are the first thing that I want to do when we get there after dinner, I'm like, let's go down to the elephant crossing. I'm going to take a walk. I'm going to take a walk because I just, I want to see an elephant because, I've seen them in circuses and I've seen them in zoos. I've seen them in books. And I could not conceive of these animals being a threat to my existence. And the researcher and his assistant, they kind of looked at each other and they said, well, please be very careful. And then they said, they put down their tea and they're like, we're coming with you. and they came, we walked out there and they were really uncomfortable. And these are, they're not, I don't know how to phrase it, but they're not the kind of people that you'd think would be super nervous, but they were very uncomfortable. And we stood around for about 5 minutes. There was a little railroad track along there. And then we talked about the history of the small gauge railway for a while. And then the researcher's assistant just kind of went, let's go back inside. And I had to go along with it, but I just couldn't change my impression of these animals. I mean, now that I know, and now that I've spoken to people who deal with the scene of an elephant attack, and they know what happens and why it happens and how it happens, it's very frightening. And so, yeah, I've kind of have come around to seeing elephants as, elephants in the wild as something to definitely keep your distance and respect those animals, and don't go up and take a selfie. Yeah.
That seems like good advice. And actually, so I have a kind of overall animal question for you, and maybe the answer is elephant. What was your most kind of radical change of perception as you dove into this world?
I definitely would have to say the elephant for sure. I mean, because some of the smaller animals, I had a sense of them being a problem for agriculture or homeowners. I guess another animal that I didn't realize was the source of such a protracted and costly conflict was the albatross of Midway Island.
Oh, yeah.
The albatross an albatross, it's a bird, and the military had this year after year after year, this ongoing, they called it the second battle from Midway Island. And they took, everything in their arsenal. There was rifles, mortars, bazookas, not always firing at them, but, making the noise, burning tires, shipping them, actually flying them to other islands thousands of miles away, carrying the eggs over to a neighboring island and kind of swapping them out, like, oh, they'll never notice. And they would. And they always return back to their nesting places, like exactly. So they had this very precise GPS. They would always come back, and everything that the military would try. The albatross it's a very unflappable bird, if you can say that any bird is unflappable. They would just kind of sit there and watch what people were doing, listen to it, and kind of go, oh well, seems like it's a little bit loud around here now, but oh well, we're staying. We're here and we're staying. The military, they knocked down a dune thinking, oh, these big birds need this updraft to fly. It's like, no, they don't. No, they don't. And you just kind of made it easier for them to come in and land there. And it went on and on and on. And nothing that they did, including the large scale elimination experiment, which was quite ghastly, none of it really made a dent in the population of the albatrosses. None of it really changed the number of birds strike. What they were concerned with, because the military, there was a Navy base and it was a refueling and a place for planes to take off, because it was halfway between Asia and America. So it was strategically located. That's why the military made a base there. And I'm sure they thought, as soon as we start up an airplane, these birds are going to take off because it's very loud. And they didn't take off. And they're still there. The Navy base is closed, and the albatross are still there. And they're the only people who are there now are some people from the National Wildlife, not Society. What's the National Wildlife? America's National Wildlife. What the hell? Society? What the hell is the name of it? It's a government. Anyway, they are there, kind of trying to restore the habitat to how it was.
Yeah, it's that is one of those stories that was part hilarious and part really horrifying, as you said, the eradication. Yeah. And I also learned that emus are also very unflappable birds, but people can read that.
Yes, the battle, General G.W. Meredith versus the emus is quite a story from the 1930s. And I'm happy to say the emus prevailed.
They did. So everyone has to read the book just for that one story. And I love that you still include a few chapters on plants, because you do kind of present it, plants are living things. They are also kind of these creatures that have been in the environment for hundreds and thousands and millions of years. Yeah. And so I'd love to just briefly touch on that. I know that the majority of the book is about animals, but I loved learning, and it was also very sad to learn about, Douglas firs and, these long death cycles and all of these things. So I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about kind of how you approach that and how you thought of it in kind of the
of the book. Well, I'll tell you the backstory behind those two chapters. One is about danger trees, and the other has to do with beans. Which you'll have to read the book. But the title I had for this book, for most of the duration of working on it, was Animal Vegetable Criminal. And I kind of wrote the book around the title. I had the danger trees, and then my editor actually said, Mary, you need more vegetables. If you're going to call it animal vegetable, I was like, come on, Jill, it's just, we're suggesting nature here. She's like, no, I really think you need to add some vegetables. So I'm like, and this was COVID had already hit. The book was turned in. So I thought, all right, I got to add something. I can't go anywhere. So I added the chapter on the terror beans. But that's kind of how it came about. But I do like, the fact that the combination of danger and trees kind of cracked me up. It's like danger mitten, danger powder puff. It was just kind of hilarious. But a danger tree is the danger trees that I went to see are. It's this beautiful kind of legacy grove of Douglas firs and other conifers up in British Columbia, Macmillan Grove it's called. And these Douglas firs are, hundreds of years old. When you live for 900 years, about 100 years of that is spent dying. You die very slowly. And someone has to kind of monitor at what point does this very, very big tree become a hazard to all the tourists who are driving and walking through this grove. So they have someone called the danger tree assessor. The danger tree assessor who every year comes in and he's kind of like knocking on the trunk, kind of putting his ear, seeing how hollowed out it is, looking for conchs, which is when the rot inside a tree has reached a certain point, it sprouts these conchs on the exterior, which that's a warning sign that things are pretty serious and you might want to think about some mitigation. And they're not cutting them down. They do something. They call in the danger tree faller blaster. Another job title that was new to me, danger tree faller blaster. So this guy, Daisy Waymer, is the guy who, and I spent some time the day that they were doing some mitigation work on some of these just massive trees, these massive moss-covered tree trunks. And what Daisy would do, he would climb up to about 2/3 high and then bore holes and put dynamite in and blow off the top, which doesn't knock the tree over. It makes it more stable, so it can continue its decrepitude in a more safe manner. So if you've got less weight and less sway from the branches, and if you're on the ground as a tourist, that tree doesn't look any different. You're just like, it's a massive, you need binoculars to kind of see what's going on up at the top, but that enables them to leave these sort of majestic trees in place longer and not worry about a lawsuit from it falling over, because that actually happened. So in a snowstorm, a very high wind snowstorm, a family pulled over, ironically, to be safe, pulled off the highway when one of these trees fell. This was some years back anyway. That's when they brought in the danger tree assessor. And so you hear about people killed by falling trees with surprising frequency. My husband and I were camping here in Northern California once, where we were awakened by a loud crack. A big oak branch had just dropped about 20 feet from our tent. And that would have killed us. It does happen. And of course, it's a liability issue. So a lot of, there's plenty of work for danger tree assessors.
For sure. And I have so many more questions, but let's open it up to the audience. We have a few already. If you guys have more questions, please put them in the little question box. So Cecilia wants to know whether there's an animal encounter that you wish you could have included, but that didn't make it into the book. And I want to know that too. I'm sure you have lots.
There's a number of chapters that I thought I might include. I wanted to become a licensed egg addler, and that is something that has,
as one does.
This one does. Who doesn't want to be a licensed egg addler?
I haven't wanted to tell anyone, but
I understand. I feel your pain. I heard about this. This is a technique used to lower the populations of Canada geese, where they're causing problems, mostly by crapping on the grass. That's mainly what people are annoyed with them for, is their poop. And we don't need to go into this, but there's a lot of exaggerations of how much Canada goose shits each day. It is insane, the misinformation on the internet, and each person keeps taking it and adding a bit. Anyway, I got to the bottom of it. That is in the book. We don't have to talk about that. Egg addling is really, this is kind of an amazing, if you take an egg and you shake it, addle it, that is, you're basically, or you can coat it in oil and kind of suffocate the embryo. But there's all this care that was taken to figure out at what point is it humane to do that. Basically, we're talking about goose abortion and efforts to figure out how far along is that embryo and is it humane to terminate that goose life. And you can do that. You have a bucket of water, and if it floats, it means there's more air than goose. That's sort of the way that you figure it out. You also have to be careful because geese can be very, very aggressive. So you have to bring an umbrella and open up the umbrella at the goose that's charging at you. So, I just had this vision of myself with a bucket of water and an umbrella going out into the shrubbery looking for goose eggs. And I thought that could be kind of interesting. I mean, the Canada goose issue is very vexing for municipalities and people who run parks. And so I wanted to become an egg addler. I thought that would be interesting. And there were training sessions some years back. It's just not, it's a little time consuming. And I think now they just tend to move the nest away. So, and you had to time the egg addling such that they're not going to just lay another batch. You had to, it had to be very carefully timed. It was actually more intricate than you'd imagine. And a lot of municipalities just went, hey, forget it. Just forget it. We're not going to do that egg addling thing. Sorry, Mary Roach.
It is fascinating. I didn't know that existed. I was, however, reading your book outside by a pond and was kind of attacked by a goose while it was happening because I was just sitting on a blanket, and I just thought it was, I was a little scared, but I also thought it was hilarious because I was reading your book, and this goose, I think I must have been in its shitting territory because there was a lot of or something, but it wanted me gone. And it probably
had a nest close by. You probably were close. Usually when they get that agitated, you're close.
It charged, like it put its head down and it started running at me.
I think you must have been close.
I think it knew I was reading about egg addling.
That could be. Or it was just a personal vendetta. It just
maybe.
Like, I don't know. I don't like this woman. But I was when I was an undergraduate. I say that having never been a graduate student. So why would I say it? When I was in college, I remember I spent a year at a school in London, and I would walk by this building. It said premises patrolled by guard geese, which cracked me up. Like, oh, I'm scared of a goose, And so one time I thought, I don't believe this. So I walked down the alley toward, where the premises, and this goose comes at me like hissing, and there's little teeth that are sharp, but I was like scared the crap out of me. It's very effective.
It is very effective. It is very effective.
It wasn't a Canada goose, but it was bigger. It was, I don't know, it's just like a big white domestic goose. I'm not sure what it was.
But it was scary. It was a guard goose.
Scary.
It was a guard goose. It had a little helmet on and everything.
Yes, it did. Yes, exactly. A walkie-talkie. Yeah.
So Austin wants to know whether you have some positive examples of humans and animals coexisting together. And I think that's a great question because you do talk a little bit, and this is one of the things we didn't get to, about kind of some of the mitigation techniques and attitudes that we can adopt to make some of these problems
sure.
easier.
Yeah, I think for sure the hopeful elements of the book are the fact that one of the reasons that we are having conflicts today is that 100 years ago, the approach to wildlife was just annihilation. There were bounties on wolves and bears and cougars and bobcats, and the government paid bounties and dropped poisoned meat and shot animals in their dens, and nobody really pushed back. And then the middle of the last century, animal welfare started to come to the fore, and environmentalism, and the public's attitudes toward wild animals began to shift profoundly. And that you as an agency, as the USDA or whatever agency was involved in this, just couldn't do that anymore. And so these animals have made an amazingly huge recovery compared to where they were 100 years ago, to the point where they're now so many of them that there are conflicts. But the thing, and the other thing I was going to say that that was hopeful is that there's been a number of organizations that are committed to coexistence, not just as a philosophy, but at bringing together people from the agricultural community, ranchers with livestock who are concerned about predators, and also the animal welfare people, and putting these people together for a few days to talk, and more than that, to listen and to try to understand and to come up with some solutions and some compromises. And hopefully these kind of combinations of people will come up with some legislation and some guidelines for how to kind of be fair to people and animals. So I found that really hopeful. There's a number of these coexistence organizations, and there's cooperation between the USDA Wildlife Services, who are the people, who come in when a rancher complains about predators. There's been some dialogue between them and the NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council, and the fact that those two entities are talking when normally they sue each other. They sue, they don't chat. They're talking, and they're coming up with compromises. They're hiring non-lethal specialists. The USDA has hired in 12 states people to not just pay lip service to, here's some solutions you might try, but to actually come in and help do it. Build a better nighttime enclosure to protect your livestock from cougars or wolves, or let's cut back the brush because mountain lions need to hide in order to pounce, and so let's do that. Or people to ride the range and figure out ways to keep flocks safer. So there's, I found all of that really hopeful. I don't know if that's kind of answers that question, but I did feel like things that, it's a slow ship to turn, but it's definitely turning. And I think that the public, most of the public, it like all things in this country, it's a little polarized, but for the most part, people value wildlife for their own intrinsic value. They don't see them as varmints or competition or, something to be kind of killed at will. And also because they've realized that some of those lethal approaches don't actually solve the problem. So I took a fair amount of hope from that.
Yeah, for sure. So Laura has a more general question about your writing process. And she wants to know, I don't think I want to know the answer to this. She said that she really appreciates the amount of research that goes into your books. And so she wants to know how long it typically takes you to conduct this research. I'm scared of the answer, but please.
I've gotten slower over the years. Between 2 and 3 years and I'm researching and writing at the same time. I mean, not literally the same time, but I mean, on any given week or month, I'm doing both. I'm setting up, let's say, a research trip, or I'm doing some ancillary research for a chapter I've gone and reported. At the same time, I may be writing a chapter, because I try to, as soon as I have all the material for a chapter, I want to write it while it's kind of fresh in my head. So I don't report it all and then write it all. I can't do that, but I know people do. And I think if you have a narrative through line, you have to kind of know what the whole story is before you start to write. You must have to do that. Right?
I research everything first.
And how long does that take you?
Well, it depends. Each book has been different. The last one ended up being, I think, from conception to done, about 3 years.
Well, that sounds about right. And But you write for the New Yorker as well. I mean, I'm just doing the book. I'm really slow. I really am. You're much faster than I am.
You're inspiring, and this has been inspiring. And there is, talking about research, there's so much that we haven't gotten to. I feel like I tried to ask a lot of questions, and still, like we just barely touched the tip of the iceberg that is Fuzz. Pardon the horrible metaphor, but thank you so much for doing this. I'm sorry we didn't get to every question, but we got to most of them.
No, it was great.
And thank you so much for hosting us. And I had a phenomenal time. Let me just give one more plug for everyone to buy this book, because you really, really should. You're not going to regret it.
And also this book is amazing. You can't even believe what she did for this book. It's just unbelievable. And plus, like, just the world you bring to life. Sorry, I know. It's really good.
Thank you.
I finished Fuzz and I loved it. Like I've loved all of your other ones, Mary. And when I was researching you today or recently, Maria, I came across your book, and I've been checking it out now because it sounds so fascinating that I need to know how the story ends. So I'm super excited to read The Biggest Bluff. I want to thank you both so much for joining us. This has been such a delightful evening, and thank you to everyone who watched. Make sure there's a link in the chat if you want to purchase a copy from the Learned Owl. I'm sure they have both. I know they have Mary's book, but I'm sure they also have Maria. And it's great to support your local independent bookstore. And thank you all, and have a great evening.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Maria. It was just a pleasure. And thank you to everybody at Hudson Library and Historical Society. I was get the whole title in there. It was a joy, and I so appreciate your support.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.